A potted history of gin, loved by communist bees. Ah, gin. Ginny gin gin, loved by royalty and rapscallions alike. In its 300-odd-year history, gin has been painted as the source of many a social ill, much like the printing press and rock and roll. But as we will see, this was a tale told to express a fear of a shifting social scene. Super for all you class warrior types. So anyway, on to the bees.
Bees?
Yes, bees. The earliest mention of Genever, also known as Dutch gin, was in an 18th century book called The Fable of the Bees.
The infamous liquor, the name of which derived from juniper berries in Dutch, is now, by frequent use from a word of middling length shrunk into a monosyllable, intoxicating, gin.
Or for a moderner translation, people were too jolly to pronounce Genever, so said gin. The book is actually about bees throwing off the dreary shackles of communism or something, but aren't all bees communist by nature with their communal, classless living thingy? Their honey's good though. Anyway, although juniper berries have been added to drinks since ancient Egyptian times, in the 17th century the Dutch added them to a malted wine to come up with a medicinal drink, the aforementioned Genever. During Europe's 80 Years' War, British soldiers were fighting alongside the Dutch in the Low Countries. It was during these wars that British soldiers got hold of some of the Dutch Genever and used it to embiggen their bravery in battle.
It's a perfectly cromulent word.
Presumably, this is where the term Dutch courage comes from. 1689, and soon after William of Orange got somewhat suckered into scaring off James II and assuming the kingship of England, he started a trade war with France. The French exported plenty of quality plonk to England, so William started enforcing blockades and introducing taxes on these Latin libations. He also introduced an act for encouraging the distilling of brandy and spirits from corn. This allowed any old body to set up a distillery so long as they posted a notice for 10 days beforehand on their property. This was a surefire way not only to replace booze from abroad, but also produce gin of a super high quality. Right? The supply of gin became plentiful. It is believed that 1 in 5 households were making their own gin, and usually in their own bathtubs. Ugh. Because gin was way cheaper than beer or wine, and water was unappealing, demand was high too. People wound up drinking so much dodgy gin that they either went bonkers or died. Things were going bad quickly. At the height of the craze, it is said that the death rate was much higher than the birth rate in London. Something had to be done. Or did it?
"'Tis strange that our great men, who live at their ease, can eat what they will, and can drink what they please, that they should contrive, and permit laws to pass, to hinder the poor, of a chirruping glass. I thank you."
The gin shop is an etching that shows some poor sozzled fella being poisoned with gin by a lady server stood next to a lady drinking gin, and a lady feeding a baby with gin, and a young lady drinking gin, and This, from what some learned scholars believe, seems to be what is behind the moral panic that accompanied gin. For one, gin was seen as quite a girly drink, and two, common folk drinking gin was seen as them getting a taste for the finer things in life. Oh, how very dare they! Between 1729 and 1751, Parliament enacted 8 Gin Acts. They were none too effective to begin with, because politics. These acts usually exacerbated the situation.
What does exacerbate mean?
It means to make things worse.
Right.
Eventually, however, the 8th and final act brought the consumption of gin down, and it was overtaken by beer. In 1751, when the 8th act was introduced, an artist produced 2 prints, Beer Street and Gin Lane. While the former depicts a scene of wholesome jolly civility, Gin Lane looks more like a scene from Southend seafront on Saturday night. Scary. These pictures, along with the final act, brought about the end of the gin craze of the previous years, and sanity returned. Aeneas Coffey, the man, the myth, the legend, swooped in to save the day. Coffey was an Irish inventor and very fond of the tipple. In 1830, he patented a gin still that produced clean quality gin, the kind of stuff that wouldn't send you absolutely doolally. Before Kofi's still, beer was cheaper than gin and not likely to off the folk who drank it, but once gin was no likely to kill folk, it made a bit of a comeback. Gin palaces opened. These drinking establishments were created as grand and comfortable escapes for folk from their usual rundown homes. Charles Dickens described them as perfectly dazzling when contrasted with the darkness and dirt we have just left in Sketches by Boz. Boz? 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 Biz? Boz. Sketches by Boz. This was during Britain's colonial times, and gin found uses overseas. In tropical colonies, gin was used to disguise the flavour of anti-malaria medicine. These medicines were often dissolved in tonic water, so when they were mixed with gin, the gin and tonic was born. English sailors often added limes due to their anti-scurvy properties, thus birthing the term limey. The Roaring Twenties, a post-World War time of hedonistic euphoria. Gin had been the drink of choice on the Atlantic crossing for Cunard cruises. Cunard cruise ships were at the time considered floating palaces, the height of glamour. With passengers crisscrossing the Atlantic between America and Europe, the idea of the cocktail party arrived in the UK. A British journalist called Alec Waugh noted that the first cocktail party in England was held by war artist Christopher Nevinson in 1924. Alec wrote, "There is nothing to do on a winter's evening between 5:30 and 7:30. But if you think long and hard enough, you'll probably remember stuff like reading books, maybe doing some gardening, even looking after the kids. But what one really needs is some kind of party that starts at 5:30, lasts 90 minutes, and at which alcohol but not much food is served." Enter the mixologists. Mixologists had been around since 1852, but with the new fad of gin cocktails, mixology had come into its own. Oh no, World War II. During the Blitz, gin factories were bombed. This did not bode well for the Axis powers. The Navy loved gin, and as one sailor quipped, "Well, Hitler has just lost the war." Oops! After the war and throughout the 20th century, gin went somewhat out of fashion, but since the 1990s and the turn of the century, gin has had a bit of a renaissance. Her Majesty the Queen herself has a gin made from the ingredients gathered from Sandringham Estate. It's good to see Her Majesty getting in on the racket. In 2018, gin sales passed £2 billion. Wow! Goodness knows how much they sold during the pandemic of 2020. Amazing! What a story gin has had. Anyway, I'm off to crack open a bottle. Chin chin!